Hello everyone, welcome to the Totally Well Show. I'm your host, Joyce Strong. The Totally Well Show is a place where we get curious, ask questions, and explore everything to do with health, wellness, fitness, and all the things it takes to help you live the highest quality, most fulfilling life. I'm here today with my guest, Dr. Deborah Bier. Welcome, Deborah.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Deborah is a dementia behavior expert, the first one I've ever spoken to that I know of, and the author of currently an ebook, From Crisis to Calm. And I've only skimmed it, I haven't read it yet, so I've talked a little bit with you to get the feel. So I'm looking forward now that you've sent a copy to me to be able to read it in depth. But I'm going to learn a lot from you today.
I hope so.
But my first burning question is, what got you into being interested in dementia, and how did you become an expert in this field?
Well, I have two sets of credentials. One is kind of academic and clinical, and the other is personal and experiential. The academic and clinical are, I have a doctorate in therapeutic counseling, I have a certificate in gerontology, and I've worked in the home care field for the past decade, but as a psychotherapist, before that, I worked with families and individuals with chronic illness. So and I love elder people. I just love them. I just love working with them. I really do. They're an age group that's really sorted through some of their priorities, and they've gotten rid of things that aren't important. And so they live more deliberate lives, I think, or they have a potential to live more deliberate lives. So my personal credentials are about 25 years ago, I had a brain injury in an automobile accident.
Oh, wow.
And I had severe cognitive impairment for about 7 years. Wow. And while I'm mostly well now, I still have some deficits. You know, we're not going to do math, are we, or bookkeeping or anything. I'm not going to work with numbers here, okay. And there's other things get confused for me, but my experience in being cognitively impaired allowed me to work through some workarounds and methods that when later I went into the home care industry and started to learn about what are best practices for dementia care, they turned out to be the same thing.
Oh, wow.
And I thought that was just hilarious that I had been preparing, not that I would recommend that preparation for anyone, but I had been preparing for years with my life to enter this field, and I didn't know it. Yeah.
Wow, that's really, and I mentioned to you before that getting my entry into what I do was similar kind of situation where you learn it not because you intended to, but then once you're so good at it, why not share what you know? And
having both an inside and an outside perspective on dementia and cognitive impairment is very unusual.
I would say so.
And I would hate for it to go to waste.
Absolutely. Well, I'm so glad I'm getting to know you and hear what you do, and I'm going to dig into some questions. So we did our homework and prepared. I should say you did your homework. And I'm going to put on my specs to be able to ask you some questions. So you told me that dementia and Alzheimer's don't really mean the same thing. And I'm a nurse, and I have to say, really?
It is such a common confusion. I was confused about it until I learned the difference. Dementia is like an umbrella term where there are many different diseases under it that have to do with cognitive impairment. And the one we hear the most about is Alzheimer's. All Alzheimer's is dementia, but not all dementia is Alzheimer's. It could be vascular dementia, frontotemporal dementia, Lewy body, or something else. But most people are diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. But we can use them interchangeably in the way that sometimes when there hasn't been a diagnosis, people will say, my mother has Alzheimer's. But the fact is we don't know that yet. We just know there's something going on.
Okay, so in first recognition of symptoms, people might get confused with that.
Only half of people ever get a diagnosis. And some of those half of people, their families are saying they have Alzheimer's, but that's a specific diagnosis.
And they just
And they
use
haven't
it
gone
as the
through
more
it.
generic term.
Right. But it ends up being confusing when someone tells me there's Alzheimer's and I see other things. It confuses me, so I always need to check out with people, was there a diagnosis made? And are you using that term because that really is the right term?
Now, do you help people, steer them to the resources they need to find that out?
I do.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And I train families and professional caregivers in approaching dementia behavior and care in a way that is full of the best practices, because a lot of times they've been trained in the worst practices because that's what we thought was right at the time of their training, and now it needs to be updated if they had any training at all. Otherwise, we just leave families to figure this out for themselves, and it's not intuitive. And sometimes the best practice is the opposite of what you or I would do between us, because we're cognitively, well, I'm pretty whole cognitively.
And you're giving me good credit there.
Yes,
So.
okay, good. Let's just say
Leave
we
it,
are.
yeah.
Let's just say we are. And they end up with a crisis that's really unnecessary if they had been educated properly.
And hence your book, From Crisis to Calm.
Yes.
Now, I was going to ask you where you got that. So, dementia is such a scary thing in our society. And I know as a nurse, I've done a lot of like side hustle things where I go out and do assessments, and that's
Right.
mostly what the
With-
insurance
yes.
companies are looking for, because people are living, but they're not living mentally intact, and they
Right.
become very expensive. So that's a
Yes.
concern.
And they want to make sure they're qualified to use their long-term care insurance, right?
Things like that, right?
Yes.
So why do you think we're so focused on grief and loss of living with dementia? And what's another way to look at dementia?
Well, we do focus on the tragedy of dementia, but this is a very long disease. It can go on for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So that person is still alive. So we have to say that there's a lot of life that still can be lived with dementia. It's not the end of life. It is the beginning of the next chapter. That if we use really the best practice methods to care for people with dementia, they can actually function better. They're happier. You don't get this widespread kind of agitation, craziness, acting out, violence that we often associate with dementia. Those are really symptoms of someone who's under tremendous stress in their environment. When we understand what that stress is and how to relieve it, they're not so upset anymore. They can actually have a good life. They can come back to having a relationship with their family. It's not going to be exactly the same. But once they're out of that crisis, which is why I call it From Crisis to Calm, once they're out of that crisis, you can almost recognize them a lot of times, as opposed to people saying, my father, I don't know who he is anymore. I don't recognize him. That's stress.
So you're saying the personality comes back?
Comes back,
Yeah.
yes. Because when we're under stress, any of us are under tremendous
I
stress.
become another whole person.
Exactly. And we see that the behavior is weird, and
Yeah.
we say, oh, well, that's stress.
Yeah.
People with dementia have been depending on their minds their whole lives, and they don't know what to do. And if we don't help them figure out how to navigate those years in their lives, then they're under tremendous pressure and not acting like themselves.
Wow.
Yeah.
So let's see, another question. You believe that people living with dementia and their families don't have to live with all the chaos and pain created by unmanaged dementia behaviors. Can you explain what can be done about dementia behaviors?
Okay.
Does that get into the 4 keys?
Yes, well, I can talk about the 4 keys.
Yeah.
The 4 keys are the way that I organized best practices in dementia behavior handling and
Did
care.
you invent this or create these
No,
keys?
there is a body of research and anecdotal experience that is available in the field. It's not widely available, but it is available in the
Okay.
field. And that's why you've never met another dementia behavior expert, because it's not a broad thing. So these practices, some of them have been verified by research, but they are put together, and then we all experience caring for people with dementia, and we all develop different ways of seeing it and refinements. So this is really a field that's in motion. People are exploring and understanding new things all the time. But I've organized the basics, what I call the foundations, for the family to understand how to proceed without this enormous upset that's been going on in their lives, into 4 keys. And I'd love to talk about one of them. I'd love to talk about part of key number 1, which is number 1 and the most important, of course, and that's the dementia 2-step. You know, the 2-step is a dance that people do.
Myself a note.
Dementia 2-step.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a dance that people do. It's a simple dance that people do together, and this has 2 parts, and it's for the caregiver to do, or whoever's interacting with the person with dementia. The first step is to check our baggage at the door. We just take a second and check in on our body language. People with dementia, particularly Alzheimer's and often vascular dementia, they have intact emotional lives. They have all the emotions that you or I have. They might be much more bigger. They might be bigger, kind of magnified, because they don't have emotional control. And they can read body language extremely well. And often when we're focused on a task, we are not thinking about our body language. I'm in a hurry. I don't know what to do. Oh, this is so frustrating. I'm exhausted. And our body language ends up looking like a clenched fist. And the person with dementia just has to take one look at that. They're not going to cooperate with that. No way. No matter what it is, I'm not having any part of that. And who would?
Of course,
come back when you're happy.
Yeah.
So if we just take that moment to check
Can you
our
imagine
baggage at the door.
if a waiter or waitress at a restaurant walked up to you and acted like that?
Yes, and when they do, you go,
Non-verbally?
"Oh, this is terrible." They can pick it up very quickly, and so we check it and we make sure we're relaxed looking. Our voices aren't tense or high. When we get tense, our voices often go up, and that we look them in the eye and we're not confrontive. And the second part of the 2-step, after we've checked and adjusted our body language, is spread some sweetness. Just spend a minute together. Don't do a task. Don't require anything of the person. Don't tell them they've got to do something different. Just visit. Because people with dementia know when they're being treated like a task and a chore and impersonalized, or when they're being treated like a valuable member of the family. And that's the 2-step, and you do that before every encounter with that person, before every care task. And that way, when you get them in a happy mood with you, they're much more willing to say, "Yes, I'll change my shirt," as opposed to, "I changed my shirt this morning already." And you get into an argument about how many days that shirt's been on. We don't correct. We don't argue, because that's contrary to spreading sweetness. So the relationship becomes really important between the caregiver and the person.
Isn't this like just the nice way to treat people in general?
You have uncovered my secret agenda. You have. I think these skills are important for caring for anybody in any way, be it someone who is disabled and dependent on you, or just someone you work in the office with. So this is a chance to practice these skills. People are so desperate because things have gone so poorly that they really, really want these skills. And once they have them under their belt, they realize how useful they are.
I imagine too that, and as a nurse, I've been guilty of this myself, where you have an expectation or a big assumption that that person doesn't even know who I am, that person isn't paying attention to me. You make some assumptions that are just out, just because you
Right.
do, it's not true.
Absolutely. Can I tell you a story about
Absolutely, yeah.
that? I recounted, I think, in this book. I had a caregiver who I trained. I've trained, my programs have trained thousands of family and professional caregivers around the U.S. and Canada. As I
That's so
teach in
good to hear.
English.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we know these methods work. But one of the caregivers I trained, her father had passed, but she realized that her father, when she'd walk into a room at a certain point in his dementia journey, he wouldn't acknowledge her at all. He wouldn't look at her. He wouldn't talk to her. He would just pretend she wasn't there. And that was her interpretation. And she found out from me that people with dementia have trouble processing peripheral information from their eyes. And they basically lose their peripheral vision by, let's say, mid-Alzheimer's. They have only about 12-inch view.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Most people don't, but now that you do, you can see how applicable this is to everything.
Absolutely.
She was coming in where the door was and where his chair was. She was coming in a place he couldn't see her. And since he had lost some of his hearing, he couldn't hear her either. And she would just leave in a huff, thinking, oh, he's so obnoxious, because they had had problems between them. And now she realizes after he's gone that it was because he didn't know she was there. And she had all of the story she had in her head about it, because she was making sense of it in a way that was logical, considering few people know about the loss of peripheral vision.
Well, again, I think it just comes back to nonviolent communication and understanding.
Absolutely.
Just
Absolutely.
not making assumptions.
I've been studying nonviolent communication this year.
With Marshall Rosenberg?
Yes, I have.
Yeah.
And I've been so struck and tickled at how this is just another reflection of the work I'm doing with dementia.
I'm recognizing it.
Yeah, you picked it right up. You've done some of that work. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
This is awesome.
That's wonderful.
Awesome.
So there is new life after you calm down the craziness, and I don't mean craziness as in it's certifiably crazy, insane, but
It feels that.
it feels crazy.
Yeah.
Life gets to feel so crazy and unpredictable. When we understand dementia in a particular way, we can understand why they're doing something. Why are they saying, I want to go home 50 times, and they're already home 50 times a day? We get to interpret that because we understand that all behavior is actually a form of communication. And when people have a dementia like Alzheimer's, they lose their ability to use speech. It starts pretty early. They start having word-finding problems and understanding problems, and eventually they may no longer be able to speak. So when you can't speak, how do you communicate? Because communication isn't just words. It's a lot more
Probably
than
mostly
that.
not words.
It's mostly not words. Our words, if they were just words, we wouldn't understand each other. So it's focusing on the ways we still can communicate. So when we look at a behavior like, I want to go home, it's going to mean something different for each person. For some people, it may mean, I'm bored. I'm done with this place. I'm ready to move on. I don't know what to do. People with dementia have trouble starting, continuing, and ending a task because they can't sequence them correctly. That's how the underwear kind of ends up outside the pants.
Yeah.
Because it's the sequencing problem. When people get dressed, sometimes they put on their shoes and then their pants. And it's hard.
Sometimes it happens with me putting on hockey equipment.
Yes.
I'm like, wait a minute.
I had the wrong order, yes. Yes.
I
But
gotta
at
take
least
my
you
skis
can
off.
recognize that. At least you can recognize that. They get confused, and we can understand what their confusion is and why they can't do things that they like and are interested in because they don't know where to start. So they're bored a lot. So I want to go home as often. I'm bored. It could also mean I feel like I don't know any of the people here and I want to be with people who know me. I don't know what my purpose or place is here. When I go home, I know what I'm going to do. Even if I believe I'm 7 years old, I know I have some chores to do. I have to collect the eggs or from the chickens or whatever the chore is. I need to know what I can do to contribute. And so we have to decode that for each person. It's not a one-size-fits-all illness.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
That's
Thank you.
brilliant. I have grandchildren. The youngest is a little over a year, and it kind of reminds me of watching their development.
Yes.
Where right now the baby is like, everything is,
Yeah.
it's the one, and you have to
Right.
like pay
So
attention
what
to
is,
the
what is he looking at?
context.
Right, the
Yeah.
context.
Yeah.
Does it mean I'm thirsty? I see my bottle. and I'm hungry. I will need that. Or does it mean there's sun in my eyes,
Yeah.
and it's bothering me?
Yeah.
You know, so it's not a
Brilliant.
one-size-fits-all, but
Yeah.
it is very akin to anyone who has trouble expressing. Even if people can speak, they often will wander around in their talk, and they're not getting to a point, and they're mixing up their stories, and so it's hard for them to express even with speech. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, that's great.
So other keys? Yeah, I'm eager
The
to
other
hear. There
keys,
are
so
three more keys.
There are three more keys. The second key is to customize care. We're already talking about it.
Okay.
Customized care. We can make something fit that person's life and habits. There's no use reinventing the wheel, and I come in and I tell you now you're supposed to shower at night because that's when I'm here, but you've always showered in the morning. Or actually you've taken a bath in the morning, not a shower. You're not a shower girl. So now I'm trying to impose what I do on you when it's really your preferences I have to figure out and meet, as long as they're safe and I can do it and they're reasonable. And of course you're going to be much more happy to go into the bath in the morning than a shower at night when it's not your time.
Yeah.
It's just not your habit.
Yeah.
The third one is to communicate well. So like I was talking about, don't walk in the room and stand in the person's peripheral vision if you don't think they necessarily have peripheral vision. If they're not acknowledging you, move to the front and approach them from the front, and only talk to them when you have their eye, because then you know they're listening to you. Don't step past arm's length, because if they're not happy to see you or they don't notice you and you startle them, they might hit you. Okay, so hang back a few feet away, make that greeting, and then come in and make sure it's safe. Ask yes or no questions, or only give 2 choices.
Is that still part of
That's
the
part of
third-
communicate
yeah.
well. So
It sounds like with kids.
it does. I remember asking a gentleman who I wasn't clear how much dementia he had, and I didn't know if he could answer my question, and it helped me to know he couldn't. I said, so you were an engineer. What kind of engineer? And he looked at me like I had 2 heads. And I said, so there's mechanical engineers and chemical engineers. He said, I was a mechanical engineer.
Yeah.
But he couldn't tell me that himself. So if I gave him 2 choices, I said, were you a mechanical or maybe a chemical engineer? Oh, I was a mechanical. Then he could identify it and say the words. It helped him. So those are part of the communication. And then the fourth of the keys is optimized stimulation. So that has to do with how their senses are seeing and perceiving things differently than our senses are. They lose peripheral vision, as I said. They can lose depth perception.
Okay.
Okay, so a part of that is that this isn't too bad for contrast, but color contrast. If this was a white table and you had these white piece of paper here, and let's say they were turned over, they would be invisible to a person with dementia who's having visual processing problems.
Wow.
Clear glass of milk on a white table doesn't exist.
Wow.
So you have arguments that go something like, well, are you going to bring me my milk? Well, I put it there 5 minutes ago. Well, no, you didn't. Well, yes, I did. It's right in front of you. I'm looking at it right now. No, you're not. You didn't. It's not there. That's how.
Wow.
That makes sense of that now.
Yeah.
Now we hear this crazy argument, and you come away as a family member going, what is exactly going on here?
And then I can just see things snowballing into a fight. Or
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. And then nothing is going to work. You just got to calm
Yeah.
it down. When you could have avoided it proactively by using, let's say, a black mug with white milk, regular milk, on a blue tablecloth.
Yeah.
And then it could all be
Or
seen.
just using a placemat or something.
A placemat,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
White plates on white tablecloths are very trendy and fancy,
Yeah.
but they're invisible.
Wow.
Yeah, they're invisible. So optimized stimulation is also to say, we're human beings and our senses need to be stimulated even when we're losing the ability to process things with our senses.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to give people things that they can do to stimulate them, or else they're going to find ways to stimulate themselves, and maybe it's not something you like, or maybe it's unsafe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's recognizing also too much stimulation is not good for people with dementia. And how much is too much? It's like a Goldilocks thing, Too little, too much, and just right. It's very individual. So, and you can often tell that by behavior.
So I know for me, if I don't get up and move, I have a drive to, like I'm hungry to get out and exercise, I want to.
Yeah.
So the same thing with somebody with dementia?
They may retain those feelings or develop those feelings that they want to be physically active. There is an agitation that can go with many people with dementia and many different types of dementia. That's not necessarily a productive agitation, but it is a real feature, and they have to do things, and they have to touch things with texture and listen to things and enjoy music. And a lot of people don't get that kind of stimulation, so they're bored and they get into trouble. And it's not trouble for them, but it's trouble for other
us,
people.
yeah.
Yes.
Well, I could go on and on with you. You're fascinating. You're such a good teacher. But we're down to our final 2 minutes of the show.
Unbelievable.
I know. I want to ask, because I ask all my guests, what top 3 things does it take for you, Dr. Deborah, to be personally well, totally well?
I need to garden. I need to garden and garden until I'm filthy, and I love it.
Garden flowers, garden vegetables?
Mostly food.
Yeah.
Herbs and vegetables,
Yeah.
but also I do flowers too.
Yeah.
I need to also cook with all of that and eat good, great, fresh food.
I love it.
And
yeah.
I need new things to learn all the time.
Fountain of Youth?
Fountain of Youth, it is.
Yeah, yeah. We're in the
That
same
makes sense.
wavelength.
That's
yeah,
great.
Yeah, yeah. I always want to be young and improving.
Yes.
It's a great sensation. That's why I took up hockey so late in life, in my late 40s.
Good for you.
So I want to make sure people know how to reach you and how I'm going to reach you in the future.
Okay.
So
They can go to my website.
and that is
DeborahBier.com.
Yeah.
DeborAh Bier.com, or From Crisis to Calm, all squished together,
Okay.
.com. And both will go to the same place.
Okay. Are you on any social media?
I'm on Facebook, and I have a page on Facebook. I think the page is DR for Dr. Deborah Bier, all squished together.
So Deborah with the DEBORAH and BIER.
Yes, like German beer.
All right. So, well, hopefully people will reach out to you. I'm sure we'll get some questions, and I'm so thrilled to have met you.
I'm thrilled
You're a
too.
wonderful teacher.
What
and
a great show you're having.
You've approached something that's important to me in healthcare and so
Excellent.
many people. So thank you for what you do.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.